Hi, and welcome to this quick tool review. This time around we'll be looking at another product from Vevor. This time around we'll be looking at a plasma cutter, a surprisingly inexpensive plasma cutter. I'm not sure which model this is because I can't tell from outside the box. It's either $216.99 or $227.99, both of which are significantly cheaper than the plasma cutter I already have. I have a Hypertherm and 45 amp, and it was on a really good deal, 1,500 and something bucks. So this is a tiny fraction of that price, but it essentially has the same capabilities. It's 50 amp instead of 45 amp, and it can cut pretty much the same thickness material. The Hypertherm has a slight edge on it, but not by much. So I'm kind of curious to see how well this is going to perform, especially for the price. This unit did not come with the box and the box technique that they have with some of their other products. I wasn't sure what to expect, but they use this high density foam that's really high quality packing material. I see that on high-end test equipment at work all the time. So I didn't expect to see that here. That's pretty impressive. Let me get this guy out of the box here and we'll take a closer look. Here's the unit out of the box. It is very small and compact, especially for something that can put out 50 amps. It's about the same size as my Hypertherm 45 XP. So that's a surprising feature here. It's got an interesting on-off switch on the back that is sealed to dust, because if you've never plasma cut before, it generates a boatload of fine metal particulates. I always recommend wearing a respirator when you're plasma cutting if you don't have a downdraft table or something that's going to pull those tiny metal particles away from you. The first couple times I did it, I didn't realize that, and then my mucus in my nose was totally black. That means some of it made it to my lungs, and it's never good to breathe metal particulates. The accessories that came with it include a six foot or so ground lead, as well as a 16-foot torch, which is quite a long torch. Came with hose, a 110 to 220 adapter, so you can use it on low current or high current, and it came with a pressure regulator. That's a really nice touch, which includes a water separator, because in case you weren't aware, plasma cutters, the air should be dry. If you use wet air, then you risk damaging and causing an early fatality in your expendable components, which can get very expensive. So you want to use dry air if you can. So it's got a filter, water separator, in addition to whatever's on your compressor, which is a really nice touch that they include that. To make shipping easier, the unit came with its cable management solution not attached. It comes in the packaging, but they provide all the hardware to do it. It's sort of a simple design, just a bent wire, but that's probably all that you need. That's one half, and here is the other half. So there is the the cable management solution. I think both your power and your other cables can loop up high, although I'm not quite sure that all 16 feet of this can fit up there, but we'll give it a shot. I suspect this has to hang off the front. Oh, they gave you some extra expendables, which is kind of nice. So at least the power cable can go up here. If not, the power cable and something else. Let's see. This is very flexible wire. A lot of vendors choose a lot of less expensive wire that's less flexible. Right now, it's pretty cold out here. Well, cold out here for Southern California. It's 61 in my garage right now, and the wire is still very flexible. That's a good sign. Let's put on the regulator next, and it's interesting. They also included with the regulator Teflon tape, just in case you didn't have any, which is again a nice touch. The regulator air filter mount can go straight on the back. They left the nuts and two washers pre-attached to make it easier for you. Those are not in the hardware kit, they're already on the device. So this guy has looks like pressure gauge, and out. So the pressure gauge here has measurements in kilogram feet per square centimeter and megapascals, so European standard. Just to cover some statistics on that, the requirements from this device as listed from Vevor themselves, if you're going to cut 2 to 8 millimeter material, you need 50 psi, 10 to 12 millimeter material, 60 psi, 14 millimeter material is 65 psi. The in-feed pressure, the operating pressure is 72 psi or less, and the in-to-inlet pressure on the regulator is 116 psi or less. The material thicknesses for the American audience, 0.078 to 0.314 inches, that's over a quarter inch, 50 psi, 0.393 to 0.472, 60 psi, and 0.551, 65 psi. Now the air pressure that's blowing out of this unit is used, the plasma heats the material to liquid state, and the air pressure blows the liquid metal out of the cut. So that is an essential feature. Now, one thing they don't list, and I can't find this statistic anywhere, is the number of cubic feet per minute your air compressor needs to be able to generate in order to use this device. So besides dry air, you need a pretty hefty compressor. I can tell you that my Hypertherm requires about 10 cubic feet a minute to run. And I have a 12 cubic feet a minute air compressor with a 20-gallon tank, 5 horsepower motor. It never turns off when you're plasma cutting. It'll never catch up. So just be aware if you buy a plasma cutter, besides having a 220 60 amp outlet, I have a 50 amp outlet. These guys require a 60 amp outlet. Besides having that, you will need a pretty hefty air compressor unless all you're going to do is very thin material. You might be able to get away with less, although I think the air requirements are still going to be similar. In addition, respirator, safety glasses. It did not come with safety glasses. You can use a special version of welding goggles that are darker than normal oxyacetylene goggles, and they make them in sunglasses form. They're safety glass sort of shape. That seems to work fine, or you can use your welding helmet if you have one. To save money, it looks like they're using barb fittings everywhere with hose clamps and this mildly flexible hose here. It's not terrible. But like I said, they did include free Teflon tape with it, which is the thick stuff's kind of interesting. They did provide fairly wide Teflon tape, and you want to make sure that the tape doesn't overlap into the airspace because pieces can break off at some point in time and end up in your airstream, which could be problematic, clog things. So not ideal. That's weird that it's, this is a tapered pipe fitting, yet it bottomed out. That's a little unusual. You would expect it to go fully tight before it ever got to bottoming out stage, but it did not. Let's see about this side. It's fairly loose going in. I have a feeling you're going to get some leaks here. Yeah, it's not even enough back tension to engage the ratchet. All right, so we'll crank it. All righty. This guy gets mounted here. It had a nut on it already, so the nut goes through here. As I probably don't need to tell any of you, a pressure regulator all by itself could be more expensive. You buy a high-end one, could be more expensive than this whole unit and everything included. So I didn't get my expectations very high when I was looking at that. All right, next up, we're going to put on the hoses and move on. One thing I'll say is that the inner diameter of this hose is kind of large because normally with barb fittings, you have to press the hose on. With this stuff, it just slides right on, which seems like it's a little oversized for the barb. Hopefully with the hose clamps, I can tighten it enough that it'll make a seal, but that's not ideal. Looks like on the compressor side, you have to provide your own fitting. They did provide a hose clamp, but not the fitting itself. Look at how loose that is. That is not that's not right. So I'm gonna have to use a couple adapters, but I think this combination should work. This is a 5/16 barb to 1/4 inch MIP, and I think it's the right size for this hose, or at least closer than what they provided. So let's get this guy on here, see if this, yeah, see now that's what I expect the barb, how I expect the barb to fit. You have to kind of push it in, not just fall in. That doesn't seem appropriate. Probably should have connected these two before I did that. I wasn't thinking ahead very well. All right, so we got the hose on here. I'm not a big fan of having this cable clamp here. I'd prefer something crimped. So at some point I might buy a hose with an end on it and cut off one side, force it over that side, and maybe get some different barbs too, I don't know, or maybe a different regulator. But for the meantime, we're gonna test this as is, and I think this will work just fine. All right, so far I haven't needed a manual to hook any of this up. Here's the ground lead right here. And that just goes in as normal. Here is the air feed, the control for the switch on the handle. That's, oh, it's got a safety, I see. So you can't just grab the handle and engage it. And then this goes on the positive terminal there. Before I disassemble this guy, just looking at the manual's in extremely good English. I gotta say, Vevor has been picking some really good vendors to make their tools for them, because the manuals are completely readable, which is very, very interesting. So this is the Cut 50P, which I believe that means it has a pilot arc as opposed to having to touch. So that's a nice feature right there. I think that's right. We'll find out when we get into using this guy. But just looking through the manual, I didn't need the manual to assemble it because it was all pretty obvious. But if you did need the manual, there's step-by-step instructions in here, including ways to improve your cutting quality. And then they're talking, there's a big section here about his air quality. That's a really good manual. That is probably the best manual I've seen come out of Asia in a very long time. That's a very good manual. Before I dig into this, why don't I take a step back and let's open this guy up and see what's inside. Gonna take this, pop this guy open. It looks like it's in several pieces. And I might be able to leave the top on while taking just the sides off. It kind of looks like that. Is that true? Why, yes it is. Oh, that's great. Boy, that's easy. Holy cow, that is a very clean layout. So again, what we've been seeing in a lot of the products out of China, they're doing a much, much better job. Very cleanly put together. Everything's conformally coated, which protects against water vapor issues. You know, if the air is highly humid, then that causes problems. They've conformally coated everything. They've got very nice large inductors. The wires are all well managed. The connectors do not have Celastic holding them in like silicone sealer, which is nice to see, because that means if there's vibration, like you keep this in the back of your truck or something like that, although I kind of think that's not going to happen with this, but maybe, then that prevents the connectors from getting loose over time. But overall, the inside looks pretty darn good. The components are laid out nicely on the PC board. I don't know how much you can see there. Very nice large heat sinks here. This is a solenoid for the air, so you don't have to worry about starting and stopping the air when you're cutting, which is nice. Everything looks pretty nice inside. I don't know what else to say. I don't think anyone wants a technical analysis of how this thing goes together. This does use IGBJs in there instead of MOSFETs, so it handles really high currents well in a very small form factor. And they have forced air cooling, and they've ducted it as well. So all the air comes, I think, in the front, out the back. It may be the other direction. I can't tell until the fan starts, but I think that's right. Nope, goes out the front. Hot air goes out the front, which is a little unusual, I think. But anyways. I normally leave the torque setting on my powered screwdriver is pretty low, and only turn it up if I need it. That way I don't risk stripping out any screws, because these are not machine threads, although they are machine threads, but I think they were power fed in to make the threads originally. They've got a nice wrenchless design for the air hose portion of the plasma torch. It's got a built-in wrench essentially in the hose itself. That's a really nice touch. There's 2 washers in here, so make sure to put your lead between the washers. So you may be wondering, why is the positive lead where you might consider the negative lead? Because the negative is the torch itself. And the answer to that is that the heat carrier in the plasma stream are the electrons themselves. So your electrons are the source, and you want them to go to your material, and so they'll end up over here. That's a little sloppy. I think this is a little out of round here. It seats all the way, but the threads don't. Oh, there we go. Oh, that's better. Much better. Okay, that was just me. All right, you might want to keep this if you ever take the torch off here to keep dirt and grime out of there. So I will set this aside. Next up, I guess, all we have to do is to try out the torch. I was looking at this, this piece on here. And so when you're cutting with a plasma cutter, you don't actually touch the cutter to the surface. You keep it just slightly elevated. This piece here will help you keep it from touching the material. If you actually touch the material, you wear out your expendables much faster. They do have some drag expendables, like I have for my other plasma cutter, but they wear out much faster. So this is a nice little, I was going to say a handicap device, but it's a nice device to help people that aren't proficient and haven't been doing it a long time. If you have, then you could probably discard this piece and just keep the spacing controlled by yourself. Just set this guy up with my compressor before I even hook the AC up. Remember I said I thought it was going to leak? Well, there you go. It's leaking like a sieve. Because you can't tighten the hose clamp enough to make it work. I'm gonna have to work on something to fix that before we can go. So the solution in temporary was to wrap these with the tape. They gave a lot of the Teflon tape, so I wrapped them with Teflon tape, put them back on, squeeze them down. They seem to seal okay, but it's not a good long-term solution. So either replace the hose or get a different barb. Different barb might be good, because the one barb I had definitely fit a lot better. So get that one if it'll fit this side. This side's probably metric, so you might have to replace the regulator slash filter. So I don't know if you can see this. Power comes on and you can adjust it from 21 amps up to 50 amps as promised, provided that 50 really means 50. We're going to try a 30. This is some fairly thin material here, some stainless steel, and we're just going to cut it and see how it cuts. For safety glasses, all I used was these Radnor welding glasses that I picked up at Airgas, and they seemed perfectly good for the brightness level of the plasma cutter. All right, so we're just going to cut here real quick. I'm having my brother-in-law do the cutting. Neither of us are very experienced plasma cutter users, but I made that first cut and I was surprised at how easy it went. And if you look, it actually did a pretty darn good job. That was freehand. So let's give it another shot. So as we were going, I felt like it was sticking, because you could tell when he was going a bit faster pace, it was cutting better. So this might be an improvement if he moves a little faster. But it's something sticking down there, and it might be the standoff thing. And eventually, if you get your skills down, you don't need this little handicapping device here. Then it might work even better. All right, let's go. That was pretty easy. Pretty darn easy.
See what it says?
Yeah, yes, I do. I didn't miss that. So you didn't, too fast there. It didn't clear the material out of the cut. And so you got to get your speed just right. And if you dwell too long, then it'll get wider. So you got to get everything just right, which I'm sure just takes practice. This is his first time ever using it. Go again. Don't get too close to the... Piercing is almost instantaneous. So there we go. That's some thin stainless stock. This is like 40,000 stainless stock. So we'll try some other material next, see how it goes. Ready? Yep.
That looked good.
Yeah, easy peasy. So once he actually used the fence, a nice straight cut, very clean cut too. I'm very impressed. The kerf is a little less than 1/8 of an inch, probably about 2 millimeters, 2.5 millimeters. All right, so we're gonna cut some 3/8 inch material here. And I already did a test cut. I didn't go very straight, but it cut it very easily. Not even at full current. I've got it at 35 amps right now. And this is using less air than my Hypertherm does, which is surprising. That cut through there like butter. Not a very straight cut, but it cut through it very easily. I am extremely impressed. No problem at all. That's a horrible looking cut. I got stuck there on a piece of the dross from the other one. Whoops. So there's the dross on the bottom, but you can just chip this kind of stuff off with a chisel. And if you get it adjusted right, you can have very little of that left over. So I'm not using a cold chisel. I'm just taking a pair of pliers and it just pops right off, no problem at all. So the dross comes off and you get as clean a cut as you are skilled at using the machine, which is not very for myself, but it did a surprisingly good job, especially at this price point. Every bit as good as my Hypertherm, at least under my hands, which admittedly are horribly non-skilled. So that's an excellent test right there. And that was 3/8 inch mild steel. All right, so here we are. We're going to do 3/8 again. This time we're going to use a fence, see if we can get a little bit straighter cut. I'm having my brother-in-law do this, and I'm just watching. And let's go. And there you go. Now, obviously, inexperienced hands, but cut through it like butter. Here's just getting the slag off with a pair of pliers. It actually comes off surprisingly easy. It's very brittle and just comes right off. You can also take a hammer and just tap the stuff off. That also works pretty well. This is probably not the best treatment for my Knipex, but it comes off very easy and then you get a nice finish. All right, so that was very successful. I was very impressed with the quality. The unit itself works great. This last run was at 44 amps and I did not increase the air pressure to 65 PSI like I should have. I had to convert that to megapascals because that's what it's got on the back. So it was 0.34 and I should have raised that up a little bit. That would have made the dross get blown out of the way a little better on the thicker material. Overall, the quality is as good on this as I can get on the Hypertherm, but of course I'm not skilled with it and have very little practice. So I don't know how to compare the nitty-gritty with this. All I can say is that it functioned extremely well, and I was very impressed with the quality. It also seems to use less air than my Hypertherm. It's lower air pressure. The Hypertherm, I was running a higher PSI than this, and this thing, although it leaks because of the unfortunate hose size, which you'll need to replace, it seems to use a lot less compressor time. So my compressor does not run the entire time you're using this. So that's another impressive feature. All for 200 and something bucks. Huge thumbs up. Thanks for watching. Hope you find it useful. Hope to see you next time.